Good morning, good afternoon, good evening for wherever you are in the world. My name is Timothy Garcia, and I will be presenting this session for Secure Your Fortress on how to utilize PowerShell and other scripting language, but primarily PowerShell to automate some of your daily tasks to help you stand out from the crowd. So, hello and good morning. Hello and welcome, everybody. It is morning where I'm at. I'm recording this the day before tomorrow's session. So I'm recording it because unfortunately something has come up in my day job and I am unable to attend in person. So I am very, very sad about that. I hope to be there with you guys in person, but at least I'm able to record this. So welcome. My name is Timothy Garcia. My current role, I am an incident response lead with ADP. I've been in that role since about May. Prior to that, I worked for Santander Bank as the head of network security. I had multiple roles while in my 3 years at Santander. I was the managing security architect as well as the deputy CISO for the Santander consumer environment. And before that, I worked for Wells Fargo for 16 and a half years. And prior to that, I worked for Intel Corporation for 9.5 years in various IT and cybersecurity roles. I am also a SANS principal instructor, teaching primarily Security 401, Security 511, and Security 555. So welcome, and I am excited to be here. Hopefully everyone is as excited to be here as I am. So we're going to talk about, right, a little bit of how we can utilize tools like PowerShell to help you to expand your capabilities, stand out from the crowd. Some of these slides are stolen and basically copied directly from Security 401 because when I was asked to do this presentation, they said, what would you like to share with students? And one of the things that I'm seeing, we have been going through a round of interviews for various different roles within my organization. We are building out our team, which is good because a lot of organizations are starting to shrink down their teams, and we're still continuing to grow because we've got a lot of needs within our environment. But we are building out a very, very good qualified team. But what I'm seeing is that, there are some gaps in some of the knowledge that I would expect for people that are a senior analyst or even a lead analyst within my organization. Also, it is very common when I'm teaching Security 401 for students to come and ask me, how can I grow in my career? How can I go in and stand out and differentiate myself from the other, candidates that are applying for the jobs that I'm interested in? My daughter works as a lead SOC analyst, a SOC technical lead for her organization. And when she first graduated college, she asked me the same question. She said, Dad, what can I do to differentiate myself from all of the other graduating students that are out in the job field applying to these various jobs? And I said, you know what? If as you're going through, if you can develop your scripting capabilities, it is a very valuable skill. If during an interview you can point to maybe your GitHub page or a GitHub project in which you contributed to, or you can talk about a time during your internships or in your career that you found a problem, identified the problem, and then solved that problem through some automation, then it is very, very impactful to me when I'm on the other side of the table and I'm asking those questions that, hey, this person is a problem solver. There's some person that has the skills and they may not have everything we're looking for, but they can research, they can find information, and they can solve issues, right? Because that's what we're all looking for. We're looking for problem solvers. We're looking for people that can make good decisions and then apply a methodology to be able to get creative and solve problems. What I've done in this section is really try to focus on, okay, some of the things we cover in Security 401 and really how you can utilize that to improve your skills, right? So we'll talk about automation. We'll look about, explain what is PowerShell, and then kind of differentiate and compare and contrast Windows PowerShell, which is what we're all probably primarily familiar with PowerShell Core, which is the newer version that is available not only in Windows, but also on Linux and Mac. Okay. Then we'll walk through kind of the way that we use PowerShell in Security 401 and kind of really emphasize how the course author has improved Security 401 to make it much more meaningful, much more realistic, and then really attempt to achieve what we often refer to as the SANS promise, that the skills you learn in class will be something that you can apply directly at work when you get back to work on Monday. So again, that's one of the very, very big goals and objectives of what Brian Simon, our course author, did when he rewrote the labs. And I have to say he did an amazing job. Right, the labs in Security 401 are awesome. They are much improved over they have in previous years. So if you've taken Sec 401 in the past, it wouldn't be bad for you to kind of take a look at it and maybe see, is it an option for me to reinforce what I learned back then, fill in some of those gaps that I still may have, and then also get some additional hands-on capabilities. Okay, so I'll walk through an example of some of the Sec 401 labs and kind of show the methodology and the process we use. And then I'll focus on why this is important, why this matters to you as individuals that are working in cybersecurity, and how it can help to benefit you individually and your organizations that are sending you to these courses. And then I'll finish up with some real world examples of where I've used PowerShell to, automate and to, increase my productivity and to solve problems within my own organizations. Okay, so this is a slide directly out of Sec 401. And on day 5 of Sec 401, we really focus on how can we implement all of the things we've been talking about up to that point in a Windows environment. So the first 4 days are about the what of information security. We talk about security architecture. We talk about network security. We talk about endpoint security. We talk about things like asset inventory, configuration management, change control, security frameworks, vulnerability assessments, limiting and controlling access. So we lay the strong foundation to give everyone a good, solid understanding of incident response, forensics, web application security, and we give you a good, solid foundation. And then on day 5, we switch gears a little bit and we say, okay, now that you understand these core foundational concepts, how can we actually implement that in the Windows environment and in the Azure cloud? And then day 6 is all about how can we do the same thing in a Linux and Mac OS environment. Okay, now just about everything we can do from the GUI, we can do from the command line. Now, as I mentioned previously, I am an old school systems engineer from way back in the day. So when I got out of the military, I was in the US Navy. I spent 5 years, 10 months, and 23 days as an electrician on nuclear powered ships. Now, not that I was counting, but I got out of the Navy specifically a little bit early. Instead of doing my full 6 years, they let me out a little bit early so I could go to college. So I was going to college and I was able to get a job at Intel Corporation working in the factory based upon my naval experience. And Intel had one of the best tuition reimbursement programs I have ever heard of, I've ever seen. And they paid for not only my bachelor's degree, multiple certifications, as well as my master's degree. But when I first started there, I was a finance major with a political science minor. My goal was to get a degree in finance and then maybe move on to law school and become a lawyer and then maybe a politician at some point in the future. But Intel they said, hey, by the way, we will pay for your finance degree because that's related to what we do. However, the way our organization is structured, we can't guarantee you a job in finance when you graduate. However, if you change majors and go to computer science, we can almost guarantee that you're going to have a job when you graduate. And sure enough, I changed majors. I got it. Before I even graduated, I was hired into the IT department and I worked as a systems engineer. I was a Windows systems engineer building, developing, and implementing infrastructure solutions for our internally based applications. And so back in those days, we didn't have PowerShell. And so everything I did, I had to do from the GUI. And it was a little bit frustrating and a little bit cumbersome. And it made my job a little bit more difficult because anytime I had an issue, I had to go in and log into the system, remote into the system, and then point and click my way around to solve that problem. Okay, so when PowerShell came out, I was happy. I was excited. I'm like, yes, now finally we have some of the capabilities that we've been doing for many years in a Linux, Unix environment. We can take some of that power and translate it over into Windows. Okay, I remember quite a few years ago, SANS used to have a 1-day course called Command Line Kung Fu, written and taught by the great Ed Scotus. And the course was awesome. I loved it. I took it. And in the course, they would say, okay, here's your challenge. Your challenge is to take this file and to, parse out the data, remove these 4 fields out of the data set, format it in this manner, and then create a new file that looks like this. And we would do that in bash. So you'd go in Linux and you say, okay, here's my, my log file, and I'm going to pull out the IP address, I'm going to pull out the host name, and I'm going to pull out the request type, and then I'm going to, dedupe it. I'm going to, remove, all the duplicate entries, and I'm going to format it and sort it by date or whatever. Okay. So we would go in and we'd pull that out, and that in Linux, in bash, that would be like six, I'd pipe sort, cut to sort to unique to awk, and then maybe a little bit of sed or something like that. And it basically, it would take like, 3 lines of bash scripting, and it would be perfect, right? It would solve the problem. It would answer the question, be perfect. Then we would say, okay, now let's do it in Windows in command.exe in batch. And we're like, oh my gosh. And it would take like 47 lines of code. And when you did that, it wouldn't even be complete. You'd have to go back and manually manipulate the file to put it in and to make it exactly like you want it. So scripting and automating in a Windows environment was very, very difficult. Now in that time frame, PowerShell had just came out. And Ed showed us to say, okay, now let's do it in PowerShell. And we saw the power of being able to do it in PowerShell, because it was more lines of code than bash, but it was significantly less than doing it in Windows. Okay, so just about everything you do in a Windows at the GUI, you can do at the command line in PowerShell. Okay, and a lot of our GUI tools in Windows are basically just GUI front ends for a whole bunch of PowerShell scripts underneath the hood, like Exchange and Server Administrator and those things. Okay, now, as mentioned here, right, if you typed it twice, you should have scripted it once. That is very, very common Linux, Unix mindset, right? Again, if I'm going to do something over and over and repeat it, a repetitive task, I should write a script so that way I don't have to go in and manually do that repetitive task. And that's some of the benefit of automation. Also, again, how does that old saying go? What's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over again without writing a script. Well, of course, I think that's insane, right? If you're going to do the same thing over and over again, you should write a script to automate that function. So what is PowerShell, right? PowerShell is the command shell, relatively easy to learn scripting language. It is replacing, and I believe that at some point in the future, there will be a version of Windows that comes out, or an update to Windows, where we no longer have command.exe available. Everything will just be done in PowerShell, because unless you're an old school, Windows system administrator like me, you probably go directly into PowerShell before you even go into command.exe. Now, like me, I'm old school, so I'm like, oh, command.exe, and then about 2 or 3 minutes into my, and now into my function and what I'm doing in command.exe, I'm like, you know what? I can do this much better, much more efficient, much faster in PowerShell. Why don't I just jump over to PowerShell and get the job done and get on with the rest of my day? Okay, so PowerShell is the replacement and will eventually be the full-time replacement. It runs not only in Windows, it's installed by default in Windows, but it also is available now in Linux and in Mac OS, which is awesome, because now I can manipulate, manage, monitor, and administer all of my traditional computing systems on the workstation and server side within PowerShell. Okay, and as I migrate to the cloud, the majority of us are working in environments that are hybrid. We have some on-prem systems, we have some cloud systems, and if I can use one scripting language to manage that, all of those environments, without having to install, in most cases, install anything different, in Windows and, Linux and Mac, I'll have to install PowerShell. But the point is with minimal tools to install, I can give myself a lot of capabilities. Okay. Now you can also use it to remote into systems over encrypted TLS communication or over SSH. And Microsoft has given us extensive logging capabilities, because as we know, anything that can be used for good can be used for evil. And we've seen with some of these frameworks that adversaries are starting to take advantage of using PowerShell and to live off the land. Now, that doesn't mean we get rid of PowerShell, even though I've heard that recommended in some organizations. But if you do, you severely are limiting your own capabilities by eliminating PowerShell out of your environment. Okay, what you want to be able to do is monitor and evaluate and understand what is normal PowerShell use and what is abnormal PowerShell use. And Microsoft has given us good logging capabilities with module logging, script block logging, and transcription logging in the Windows environment. Okay, so we have 2 versions of PowerShell. We have Windows PowerShell, which is the full .NET Core, right? It runs only on Windows, installed by default. And for now, it has a few more commandlets. However, this has been frozen by Microsoft. Microsoft is putting all of their development efforts into PowerShell Core. PowerShell Core is the .NET Core framework. It runs on Windows, Linux, and Mac OS. And even though it's not installed by default, it is relatively easy to install on Windows and in Linux and in Mac. I've done it on all three platforms, and it is very, very easy to install. It is available for download on GitHub. And for now, it has less commandlets. It's not as feature rich and robust as Windows PowerShell. However, that is going to change relatively soon because of the fact that Microsoft is focusing their development efforts on PowerShell Core. That is the future. And, again, there's going to be probably a point in time when we no longer have Windows PowerShell. All we have is PowerShell Core, and that will run in all platforms, right? All of our big three platforms. Now, in Security 401, as I mentioned, Brian Simon, our course author, has done an amazing job rewriting all the labs. He rewrote all the labs at the end of last year, and we introduced them in February of this year. And it's interesting because I taught this course 2 weeks back to back in February. And in 1 week, I taught the old version, and then the following week, I taught the new version, and I was blown away. Even though I went through and I did all the labs to prepare for the teach, when we did them in class, I was blown away at the number of questions and about the value that was implemented and increased with the new labs, right? And Brian is very adamant about working very hard to deliver on what we call the SANS promise, that the skills you learn in class today are things that you can apply directly back at work on Monday. So what Brian did is in the labs, not only did he write labs that demonstrated the usage of the tools and reinforce what we talk about in the actual lecture, but he made them real world, right? He made them scenario based. We have AWS server compromise, and we have a USB compromise, and we have, files that are being used to not only exploit the system, but to exfiltrate data. And it is just a great set of labs, okay? We have a full day of Windows security. As I mentioned, day 5 is all about Windows security, and day 5 culminates in a final capstone lab for day 5 that says, okay, here is a deep dive into the Windows PowerShell environment to be able to understand how to use these commandlets, how to expand the capabilities, how to put them together in multiple different ways to be able to manipulate the objects and format the data and present it in a way that is meaningful and useful to not only, retrieve the information, but filter the information and format the output so it's beneficial to analysts to perform their analysis. And I know that I love to do demos, and most of my other instructors love to do demos. So during the course, we are giving some demonstrations and to show the ease and the capabilities of PowerShell and also to kind of demonstrate a different way of finding similar answers in the lab. Okay, so as an example, right, this is a screenshot of one of the lab environments, and permissions are really something very, very important to understand on a Windows environment. I have permissions associated with just about every object I have. Files have permissions, directories have permissions, registry objects have permissions, Active Directory group policy objects have permissions. So in order to understand the permissions, we can go in and use the get ACL command. And in one of the labs, we look at some of the permissions associated with some of the file system NTFS permissions associated with some of the objects to understand, okay, who owns this particular, because every object has permissions, every object has an owner. And the ownership is important because the take ownership privilege is a very, very risky and powerful privilege in a Windows environment. The very first incident I ever worked in my career demonstrated that to me because I was the administrator and I couldn't access a particular directory because my account was denied access to that set of permissions, and deny permissions overwrite any allow permissions. So even though I was the administrator, the deny permissions on that folder prevented me from accessing the system. However, I was able to take ownership of that object, and once I owned that object, I could change the permissions to whatever I wanted. Okay, so I struggled for about a day and a half to gain access to this object. And then once I realized and once I figured out that I could take ownership, I was able to change the permissions to whatever I want and get access to the information. So we demonstrate some of that in the lab environment. Also, again, when we walk through the final capstone lab on day 5, we really focus on, how I can go in and build upon different skills. Okay, one of my favorite questions to ask any potential candidate is, can you tell me multiple ways to interrogate the system to understand what services and what processes are running? Okay, and almost everybody knows that I can go into services.exe and I can go in and see the running services, right? Everyone gets the GUI, right? I can go into Task Manager and I can see services. Okay, but sometimes they get PowerShell, but what about WMIC? What about the other different commands within Windows that I can query information? Because when I'm doing an investigation, it's important to ask the same question in multiple ways to see if I get the same answer. Okay. Now, I have 4 kids, and my kids range now in age from 24 to 30 to 35. And when they were younger, we would oftentimes go out. My wife and I would say, okay, we're going to have a date night. Older kids watch younger kids. We'll be back in an hour. We're going to go grab some dinner, spend some quality time together. So one night we did that, and we come home, and we come home from dinner. I go back and I jump on the couch and I put on the game and I start watching the end of some type of game. I think it was the Suns game. But my wife, walks into the living room and she says, something's wrong. And I said, what? What are you talking about? What's going on? I was like, are the kids okay? What's going on? And she's like, exactly. The kids didn't come to greet us when we first got home. And don't you think that's a little odd? And I said, yeah, it's kind of odd, but they're getting older. They probably don't care about us anymore. The older ones probably don't. They're probably on their phone or talking to their friends or on the internet or something. The younger ones are maybe playing the game. But it was kind of weird because our kids always came to greet us at the door. Like, hey, where'd you go? What'd you do? Did you bring us something? All of that stuff. Nobody did anything. And she said, and something's weird about this room. And I start looking around and I'm like, what? Nothing's weird. What are you talking? I was like, I think you're crazy. And then I'm like, oh, nice shot, right? Because I was focused on the game. And she's like, nope, something's weird. And she walks over to the lamp, turns it, and sure enough, big giant crack on the lamp. And I'm like, how did you know that? And she's like, because I knew something was odd. So what do? We separate the kids and we ask them the same question. Now, the 3 oldest ones, they are all on the same page. They're unwavering, sticking to their story. The youngest one initially tells us the same story, but we could tell something was wrong. We could tell that she was like not too sure in what she was saying. She was, trying to remember what she was supposed to say. And we said, are you sure? And she's like, yeah, I'm sure. And I said, are you really sure? And she said, and then finally she just broke down and confessed, right? She's like, oh my God, we were throwing the ball and Valerie tripped over the dog and she fell and she grabbed the cord on the lamp. The lamp started falling. Joseph dove to grab the lamp. He caught it barely, but it still hit the ground and cracked. Okay. And she spilled all the beans. Okay. Because we asked the same question to different children and we got the same answer initially, but as we continued to query and query and query, we started getting different answers. Okay. Now that's what you can do. So again, what we're going to do in the lab is we walk through, hey, let me go ahead and see and get service. And the great thing about PowerShell is that the output of the PowerShell is not just text as it would be in command.exe. It is PowerShell objects. And these objects have properties and methods which allow me to interpret and evaluate those properties. Okay. So again, I can now measure the object and I can say, okay, out of my services, I have 275 installed services. Now I can start to filter that information. I can say, okay, get service where the object status like running. And I can see out of those 275 installed services, how many are currently running in the environment. And then I can measure that object and I can say, okay, now I have 100 services that are running. Out of the 275, I have 100 services that are running. And you can see now I can start to evaluate my environment. And I can go in and do this across multiple systems if I can automate this. Okay, I don't want to be doing this manually, especially if I have to query 10,000 systems. I don't want to go in, put my hands on keyboard on 10,000 systems and type in get service, where object, right? I want to script this out and then run a script and then automate and then pull all that information back and say, okay, out of my 10,000 desktops that all should have the same image, do I have 275 installed services on those systems. And I say, yep, at 99,000 or 9,987, I have 275 installed services. And on these 8, I have 276. And on these 4, I have 278. And on this one, I have 282. And so now I can say, okay, those 13 systems are the ones I want to start my investigation on, because every other system, right, has 275 and they're all the same, right? These 275 are identical across these 9,987 systems. These 13 ones are the ones that are odd. Okay, so I can start to script this out and automate this. I can analyze and now I can, automate the process of collecting the information and then even evaluating the information and filtering out all the known stuff and then focusing on those outliers. Okay, and then I can put this in a nice little output, because again, I can take the output of that commands that I've run and then format the output so it can make it easier to understand. Okay, so why is this important and why does this matter? Because security is becoming more and more competitive of a workforce. I know that we all hear the stories and we say, yes, hundreds of thousands, millions of unfilled jobs in cybersecurity, and some of that is true. However, I know a lot of people that are currently looking for work and open to work that are highly skilled, highly qualified, that are struggling to find jobs. Okay, resources are limited. None of us have enough time, enough people, enough budget to do what we need to do in cybersecurity. So the more that I can automate my daily tasks, the more I can improve my productivity and focus on the things that matter, the analysis of the information. When I can automate the collection, the parsing, the filtering, and the reporting of the data, now I can focus on the analysis. It is a skills multiplier. It gives me ability to multiply my capabilities. Okay, and again, it creates a different mindset, right? When you start doing this process of automation, you start looking for ways and opportunities, and you start finding and seeing areas to automate your work all the time. You're like, wow, we could do that better if I wrote a script. I could do that better, faster if I were able to automate it. And you may take a little bit more time to write the script than it would be just to do it the first time. But then the next 100 times you do it, it speeds things up so fast. And now with AI, right, scripting has never been easier to learn and to perfect, right? There is no shame to my game. I always do the same. I always start by going out and either Googling Microsoft Copilot, ChatGPT, because I don't want to build anything from scratch. Okay, if someone's already done it, don't recreate the wheel. Take advantage of work that's already been done. Utilize your tools to their max extent possible, right? Go ahead, and here's an example of where I just, said, hey, write me a script that goes in and looks at these, script block logging to look for anything that contains the word evil. Now, again, this is obviously something I just made up for this presentation, but you see how effective it is. It writes the basis of the script for me, and it also tells me exactly what it's doing to give me ability to be able to perfect it and make it much more valuable so I can learn how to do it in the future. It is an amazing, amazing tool. Do not overlook it just because it's OpenAI, just because it's ChatGPT. Now, don't put your own source code in there that could potentially expose your organization. But if you're trying to solve a problem, you can get a template to start from and then build upon that as you evaluate and improve your skills. Okay, so now what are some real world examples of which I've done this? We had a requirement to gather a whole bunch of information for the FSISAC years ago. And the process took about 4 hours to be able to go in and run the queries in Splunk, take the output of that information, redact it, eliminate, remove any proprietary information, and then send it up into, share it out with our FSISAC counterparts to be able to share information with other financial services. Now we said, okay, we can do this better. So one of my partners, he built some dashboards in Splunk, and then I took the output of that dashboard, and then I went through and wrote a script to redact the information that contains certain keywords and certain IP addresses and host names to eliminate that out of the output in Excel. And then it was only about a 10-minute analysis job to be able to evaluate and validate that the scripts ran properly to make sure everything else was removed. So we took something that took about 4.5 hours down to a half an hour. Okay. When I do hunting, my goal of every hunt that I do is to go in and find, right, not necessarily find evidence of bad activity or actors in my environment, that's of course one output. But my goal is to never have to hunt for that artifact again. So again, the manual process I perform hunting, my goal is to then take that process and the mechanism that I use to find that artifact, filter out anything normal and expected, and then write it into a script or create a use case in my sim to automate the process of hunting for that particular activity in my environment. So I want to automate my hunt, not the hunt itself, but take the output of my hunt and automate that process so I don't have to hunt for that particular artifact again manually. I automate it so I can then detect that activity in my environment in an automated fashion. I can increase my productivity. We had a process that built some dashboards looking at user activity, and when we had new users to monitor, it was a process of going in, taking the usernames, the host names, and the email addresses, and formatting them specifically to be used in our query. And it was things like, putting it in single quotes or double quotes, separating by comma. And that process took, to do it manually in Excel or in CyberChef, took about 45 minutes. I automated and scripted out and knocked it down to less than 5 minutes to run the scripts by generating the list of usernames, host names, and email address, and then using that as an input into my script. I demonstrated that. Okay, so this is a tremendously valuable skill that will improve your productivity, enhance your benefit and value to the organization, and help you to stand out from the crowd. So thank you guys for spending some time with me. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. They will put my contact information. So if you have any questions or concerns after the end of the presentations, after the end of today's material, do not hesitate to reach out and ask. And thank you for all the time you spent with me. Good luck and enjoy the rest of the talks. Thank you.